Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole and I'm going to be doing another book haul with you today. I have been gathering books to myself since the beginning of the year. So even though I've already done a book haul this year, that was actually for books that I hauled like at the end of 2024. So these are books that I hauled just in January and February. I decided to sort of narrow them down there. And yeah, let's look at the books that I got. Let's talk about how many books I've read so far and compare those two numbers and see what's coming out on top. Not that I necessarily care myself, but I'm always interested when other people talk about that. But first, let's get into the books. So the first two books that I have are both works of nonfiction, and I'm going to go through these in no particular order, though I've loosely categorized them. The first work I have here is How to Talk About Books You Haven't Read. This is by Pierre Bayard, and I picked this up used, and I just thought this was such an interesting concept of a book. So it's supposed to be sort of a love letter to books, a book about books, a book talking about how sometimes you get in the socially awkward situation, I guess, of somebody asking you about a book that they think you should have read, or maybe everybody's talking about a book and you haven't read it. And so he kind of talks about like, well, how could you do that? How could you do it well? It's not supposed to be like a devious thing. Apparently the book is rather humorous and I could definitely see that. And he also suggests that it's an interesting topic to argue over. And I would agree because I've definitely had conversations with people about books that I've read and they haven't read, and I can tell they haven't read it, and I can tell they're trying to make me think they have. Or, which is the one that actually bothers me, they've only seen the movie and they want to talk about it as if they've read the book. That's annoying. But anyway, I thought this would be a really fun book. I don't read a ton of nonfiction, but this is one that caught my eye, honestly, while I was waiting in line to pay for some other books. The next work that I have is Black Boy by Richard Wright, and go me, I've actually already read this book. And I picked it up in January, I believe, before I read Invisible Man. And actually, it was a good purchase. Richard Wright and Ralph Ellison actually were friends and knew one another really well. And I happened to end up reading this book in February after I read Invisible Man, and I'm so glad I did. This is a autobiography of Richard Wright and his growing up from childhood and just his experience of moving into Chicago and living there and trying to make his way, and just his experiences going from a Black boy to a Black man in a lot of ways. There were a lot of connections between his life experience and things that I read about in Invisible Man, and I'm really happy that I actually read these books pretty close together and would recommend that other people do. And I have already reviewed this book. It's in one of my weekly reading wrap-ups that I posted in the month of February. I also picked up two works of fantasy. I'll start with the bigger of the two, literally just in height, and that is A Declaration of the Rights of Magicians, by H.G. Parry. I read the unlikely disappearance, reappearance of Uriah Heep. What is it called? It's literally up there on my bookcase, right there. The Unlikely Escape of Uriah Heep by H.G. Parry. Absolutely loved that work of fantasy, and I was like, I have to try it more of his. This is one of the two books of his that I was really looking forward to, and I didn't realize until I saw the side that it's actually a series, which made me go, ooh, what did I just do? But that's okay. I don't mind just reading one book in a series and then skipping all the rest. And the way this book is described on the back and blurbed makes me want to read it just that much more. Fans of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell will be enchanted by this sprawling epic of revolution and dark magic. So this is set in the Age of Enlightenment and Robespierre calling for the French Revolution. It takes place in France, I believe. So I'm guessing that there's going to be some idea of like two worlds or something else going on behind the scenes of the French Revolution, and I'm basing that partially just on my thoughts of The Unlikely Escape of Uriah Heep, but I'm definitely interested to see how this goes. Also, I'm realizing I kind of have a thing where I really enjoy books that are about magicians, not just books that have magic in them, like fantasy novels, but like actual magicians themselves. So definitely interested in this. And one of the reasons that I know that I'm interested in books with magicians is because the other fantasy book that I picked up at a completely different store at a totally different time also has magicians in it. And that is the Deptford Trilogy by Robertson and Davies. So this has all three books in the trilogy in it: Fifth Business, The Manticore, and World of Wonders. And this one I find really intriguing because it sounds to me like it's a combination of mystery, magic, and fantasy, like as in magic being magicians, not just that there's like fantasy magic going on. And I guess the entire thing is surrounding the mystery of Boy Stanton's death. And it says it provides an exhilarating antidote to a world where the fear and dread and splendor of wonder have been banished. I have no idea what that means, but I think I looked it up while I was in the bookstore, and something about it, either there or beforehand, just like had a lot of buzzwords that worked for me. Like there was the magic, there was this mysterious death. The fact that it was a trilogy somehow didn't bother me, even though fantasy series are my number one most unread books on my shelf. Really need to work on that. Okay, next, I'll talk about the couple of classics I picked up. I did pick up Zofloya, or The Moor. This is by Charlotte Darce and is at Oxford World Classics. It is supposed to be a tale of lust, betrayal, and multiple murder set in Venice in the last days of the 15th century. And this author is supposed to display the transition from the victimized status of Anne Radcliffe's heroines to fully conscious commitment to vice that goes beyond that of Monk by Lewis's Deluded Ambrosio, which is fascinating because I know in The Monk that guy's supposed to go like well past the norms. So I'm fascinated by this book. I'm fascinated especially by the mention of it going beyond like the sort of typical at the time heroine that Anne Radcliffe did, which I don't even know that I would always say the women in her books are heroines, but I've only read one of them, so maybe that's why. Anyway, this has been on my TBR wish list for a while, so when I saw a copy of it used, I decided to pick it up. So sorry, I'm going to cover up their name. I bought it used. It had a person's name on it. It's fine, whatever. Um, but I already read this book, I'm happy to say, and I loved it. This was a 5-star read for me. It was, I think, the best book I read that month, or one of the best books that I read that month. I'm pretty sure I labeled it the best book I read that month. And it follows this woman's story as she falls in love and seeks love and just ends up in just these very complicated relationships, I would say. If you like books about complicated relationships and considering why certain people get into a relationship with other types of people and then stay in that relationship and just everything that happens there, this is a book for you. It is a classic. I will say there's a lot of I dialect in here where like you're reading like the intentionally misspelled words because she's trying to get you to hear their dialect rather. And it is very, very hard to read in my opinion. I listened to this whole thing on audiobook and occasionally immersive read it and occasionally stopped the audiobook and just physically read it because stuff was happening and I needed to get it through it faster than my audiobook was letting me. So if you read the first couple of pages and you struggle with it, I highly recommend the audiobook, and I'll put the narrator's name on the screen. It was amazing. The next book I picked up is The Chinaberry Tree. This is another book that has been on my TBR list for a while, and so I was happy to see it in the store used. Also, this is the second book that I have picked up that is in this edition. I forget what it's called. Oh, African American Women Writers of 1910 to 1940. So it's a particular publication, and they all look like this. And so far, I've been pretty impressed and interested in the 2 or 3 different books that I've seen put out by this. So I'm now going to start looking for this spine whenever I'm at used bookstores. That said, The Chinaberry Tree itself is a story that focuses on 2 women, one of them the beautiful daughter of a common law interracial union, and this is set, I think, in the 1930s. and she is tormented by the idea that life has passed her by because of her bad blood. And then the second woman it talks about is her cousin Melissa, a self-confident teenager to whom even darker secrets are revealed. So I don't recall what originally got this book on my TBR wish list, but I don't think I've seen it in a store ever. And so, yeah, I was happy to pick it up used, and I'm really fascinated by this topic. I don't know if passing comes into play in the story. I'm guessing it doesn't because she's feeling like life is passing her by, but I think there was some connection to that that made me interested in reading this story. I picked up Sophie's World by Jostein Gaardner, and this will actually be a reread for me. I read this back, I think, in high school, and I recall liking parts of it and then not understanding a lot of it. And as I look more into this book, I realize it's because it deals with a lot of philosophical questions, and I just don't know that I was reading it with that thought in mind at the time. So this discusses 14-year-old Sophie, who encounters a mysterious mentor who introduces her into to philosophy and the mysteries of philosophy, I assume. And then she starts getting these postcards from another girl and is trying to figure out who this other girl is, why she's getting the postcard, reflecting on who she is, that kind of thing. And I think one of the reasons that I did enjoy this in high school was because it featured a young woman around my age thinking about deeper life issues, but having a framework in which to think about them. But it'll be interesting to see how I feel about all of that as an adult. Next, I picked up a New York Review book that I've had on my list for a little bit and kept seeing around and finally decided to go ahead and get, and that's Beware of Pity. And this follows the story of a soldier during the Second World War, First World War? What war is he in? Anyway, it features a young man who is stationed as an officer on the edge of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and is invited to the home of some wealthy landowners in the area where he is. He goes to the party, he asks the daughter to dance just to find out that she is actually crippled, and he's kind of made a social blunder. My guess is that this is looking at guilt and pity and disability and just how all of those things get wrapped up and how, you know, the right and wrong ways to respond to people in those situations. It sounds like it'll be really interesting and very much a psychological character study. Okay, continuing on with literary fiction in a very different direction, I picked up The Deluge. I don't remember what finally made me decide to pick up this book. It's one that I've been thinking about on and off for quite a few months at this point, and I want to say I heard somebody review it and finally said, okay, yeah, I want to read that. So my understanding of this book is that it is a combination dystopian slash climate fiction, political type of book put together and things. We'll see once I actually go to read it. But I am really fascinated in just the combination of the dystopian and climate fiction. I like the fact that it's a longer book and hopefully will really enjoy it. And I'm definitely trying to expand my more recent literary fiction collection because some of the literary fiction that I have are still like classics or were written, 10, 20, 30 plus years ago. And I do always like a good dystopian, so I'm happy to add this as one to my shelf. I finally took the plunge like I thought to myself I was going to, and I found a used copy of Gravity's Rainbow and decided to pick it up. This is a work by Thomas Pynchon. It is known as a work of, I believe, postmodern literature, which is something I usually avoid because I'm not a fan always of the writing style. But my thoughts on that are starting to change more and more as I accidentally end up reading more and more stream of consciousness and the like. And so I finally decided, let me give this a try. And I've seen a couple of people say that immersive reading it with audiobook is really helpful, and I had never thought of doing that. So that is probably how I will read this book when I go to do it. And yeah, we'll see when I actually pick it up. Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie is another book that I've been wanting to read for a while, or may have already read. I can't remember what I've read by him because it definitely would have been over 20 years ago, and I no longer have a copy of the books of his that I read. So I did find this edition used, and again, it was something that I wanted to reread, but I knew I would want a physical edition of it to annotate. And one of the things that really interests me about this book is that it's multiple different narratives, I believe, of children who are all born on the same night at the same time, which is the night of India's independence. So it's in 1947 is when it takes place. And so I just thought that was a really interesting way of telling a story is through these various voices. I'm not sure how long we'll go into the lives of Midnight's children, but I'm looking forward to it. The last three books that I have to talk about are all works of historical fiction. I'll start with the one that I've already read, and that is The Women by Kristen Hanna. And oh, do I have thoughts about my reading experience of this. And I am still going to do a standalone review of it. It's just a low priority for me. And so it will come at some point, but I've tabbed all the things that I have comments to make on it. And that's all I'm going to say about that book. I also picked up this historical fiction, Raintree County. This is a massive mammoth that has been on my TBR wish list for ages. Um, I believe for a while it was no longer in print and then has come back into print by Chicago Review Press. And so when I saw that, I picked it up. I had picked up a used copy of it from a local bookstore, but I realized that there's certain things I now need to look for when I'm buying used books because a lot of them end up being really dusty and I'm very allergic to dust. So I had to get rid of that copy and once I realized I could get a new edition, bought a new book version of the book. The other mammoth book that I picked up is Against the Day by Thomas Pynchon. Again, I want to try something of his, apparently two things of his. I did pick this up because initially I was thinking of doing the read along that people were doing this year with it. It's also a type of historical fiction that I feel like would potentially work better for me than Gravity's Rainbow. I have heard that this is written a bit more like a regular story, but we'll see. I really haven't read anything by Thomas Pynchon, but there's a lot of things in this book and about its writing that I don't know, just really interests me. It takes place during the time of World War One. I think at the start of Chicago's World Fair. Oh no, it's between Chicago's World Fair and the years just after World War One. Okay, I got that totally wrong. But anyway, so there's anarchists, there's balloons, there's zeppelins. I don't know. Sure, tell me a story. Let's travel the world and beyond. So that's it. That's all the books I have hauled. There are 15 in total, right? 15? Yeah. There are 15 books in total. There are actually 7 other books that I have hauled since the beginning of the year, but those are in March. And since we're still in March and I might buy some more books, I figured I would wait. But I have to date, at the time of filming this, hauled a total of 25 books. I have read a total of 29 books. So if I only purchase 4 more books between now and the end of this month, it'll all have equaled out, right? Now, I haven't unhauled that many books. Maybe I should also be looking at that. But you know what? In all fairness, I have unhauled books, and I know at least one of my 2 unhauls included 15 books. So I have at least unhauled as many books as I have purchased, and I've read more books than I have bought so far this year. So I'm happy with that. I can't complain. Not that I would, even if that wasn't the case. Let me know if you have read any of these books and if you think there's any I should prioritize over others. And let me know if you've bought anything recently and what it is and if you've read it. And I will talk to you next time.